Because one of the things that Westminster does, of course, there are many things that you have power over as the leader of the Scottish government, as the First Minister of Scotland, but you don't have power over everything, which is why you want independence. But one of the things that Westminster still has power over is the decision about whether to develop new oil and gas fields. That is a decision for Westminster. But SNP MPs sent to Westminster would have a vote on that. So really simple question. Do SNP MPs vote to approve new oil and gas fields, protecting jobs in Scotland? You keep saying up to 100,000 jobs are dependent on that industry here. Or do you vote against and keep the oil and gas in the ground?
It essentially depends on the impact of any of such development on our move to net zero. So what we've said is that all licences and all applications need to be considered on a case-by-case basis based on their compatibility with our objectives on climate. So there will be that test is absolutely vital to be undertaken to determine whether any new development can be compatible with the necessary journey to net zero that we must make as a society.
I don't think people watching knows what that means. You see, they knew with your predecessor, Nicola Sturgeon, when it came to opening a huge new oil field, Rosebank, said it was the greatest act of environmental vandalism in my lifetime. When you were in coalition with the Greens, we knew it was no more oil and gas. Now there's an election. It's all a bit hazy, isn't it? It's all about we're not sure. We don't say yes, we don't say no.
Well, I think the consistent point in all of those different statements you've put to me is the necessity of undertaking the assessment as to whether the development is compatible with our objectives on net zero. We've got a climate emergency. None of us can duck that. I can't duck that, and I'm not prepared to duck it. But I've also got to manage a transition for the oil and gas sector that enables that sector to establish fiscal sustainability, and also to then be able to contribute towards the journey to renewable energy, which is a very significant opportunity in Scotland, particularly in the field of offshore wind.
I think you're saying so some new oil and gas, possibly, in certain circumstances.
Well, what I'm saying is that every particular development has got to be tested against its climate implications.
Sure.
Now, forgive
me, but people who are passionate about climate change say you don't need an assessment. It's obvious. It stays in the ground. Oil and gas stays in the ground. And that's what Nicola Sturgeon used to say. It's what the Greens say in Scotland. And you seem to now be wobbling on it.
Well, what I'm saying is that there has to be an assessment to determine whether or not that any licence application is compatible with our net zero obligations. Now, the Prime Minister has basically said he will licence 100 new projects. I think that is utterly irresponsible. That is climate denier status of the first order. So we've got to have a rational, considered process to look at every application to determine whether it can be sustained and compatible with our climate objectives.
You know what that means, though? It means uncertainty for people who are prepared to invest not $1 million or $2 million, not $100 million or $2 million. There are people watching your interview who've got billions of pounds to invest in Scotland, and they hear you unable to say yes or no. They hear uncertainty. They hear people playing politics with 100,000 jobs in oil and gas. And won't they think, we'll keep our money where we like, we won't invest in Scotland?
I think what they'll hear is a rational process from a rational government, which says we've got an obligation to get to net zero. We've got to tackle the climate emergency, and we've got to make our contribution to that. And the oil and gas sector accept that. They accept that journey's got to be made. What they're looking for is a government that will work with them to make sure that they can manage that transition. I've lived in Scotland all my life, and I saw the hopes and the livelihoods of my peers blighted by the industrial devastation of Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s. And I will not do that to the oil and gas sector in the north east of Scotland.
We're going to move on.